Jeffrey Dahmer, a name that still sends chills through America more than 30 years later. In the summer of 1991, police stepped into his small Milwaukee apartment and uncovered a nightmare beyond imagination. It was a discovery so shocking, it made headlines around the world and left a permanent scar on the history of true crime. But who was Dahmer really? What shaped him into one of the most infamous serial killers of the 20th century? And how can we talk about his story with the respect his victims deserve? To understand Dahmer, we must go back, before the crimes, before the trial, to the life that created the man history would call the Milwaukee Monster. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. From the outside, his early childhood seemed ordinary. His father, Lionel, was a chemist. His mother, Joyce, struggled with anxiety and depression. But behind the closed doors of their home, conflict was constant. Shouting matches, instability, and emotional distance created an atmosphere of tension that Jeffrey absorbed from an early age. Neighbors later described him as quiet, even polite. But quiet can often hide something deeper. And for young Jeffrey, it did. From the age of just 4 years old, Dahmer developed a fascination with bones. His father recalled the moment vividly. Jeffrey heard the sound of animal bones rattling in a bucket and became almost mesmerized. What started as curiosity grew into obsession. He collected roadkill, dissected small animals, and even stored the remains in jars. While most children outgrow such fascinations, Jeffrey's interest only deepened. By the time Dahmer reached high school, he was already struggling to fit in. He was awkward, isolated, and turned increasingly to alcohol. Classmates remembered him sneaking liquor into school, hiding bottles of scotch and beer in his locker, and drinking throughout the day. At just 14, he was already a full-blown alcoholic. On the surface, he played the role of a prankster, someone classmates later nicknamed doing a Dahmer, imitating his strange outbursts in the halls. But inside, Jeffrey was growing more detached from reality. He wrestled with thoughts he didn't dare share with anyone. Fantasies of control, of keeping someone with him forever, of never being abandoned again. In June of 1978, just weeks after graduating high school, Dahmer committed his first murder. He picked up 18-year-old hitchhiker Stephen Hicks and invited him home for drinks. After several hours, when Hicks said he wanted to leave, Dahmer panicked. Overcome with fear of abandonment, he struck him with a dumbbell and strangled him. Then, in the basement of his parents' house, he dismembered the body. For Jeffrey, this was a turning point. In later interviews, he said it wasn't hatred that drove him, it was desperation. He simply didn't want Hicks to leave. But the truth is, Dahmer had crossed a line he could never come back from. After that first murder, Dahmer's life spiraled. He dropped out of college, was discharged from the army for alcohol abuse, and bounced between jobs. For nearly a decade, he lived in relative obscurity, but the urges never left him. They grew stronger, darker, and harder to control. By 1987, Dahmer killed again. His second victim, Stephen Tuomi, met him at a hotel. Dahmer claimed he woke up to find Tuomi dead beside him, though evidence suggested otherwise. From that moment on, Jeffrey Dahmer's murders became more frequent and more calculated. Over the next 4 years, Dahmer lured young men, often gay men of color, back to his apartment. There, he drugged them, killed them, and attempted to preserve their bodies in ways that defy comprehension. Skulls in the freezer, jars of organs, photographs documenting every stage. His crimes were not only brutal, they were methodical. And yet through all of this, Dahmer avoided capture. In part, this was due to his quiet demeanor. He was soft-spoken, polite, and almost invisible to those around him. But another factor was race. Many of his victims were Black, Asian, or Latino men, and their disappearances were not taken as seriously by police at the time. In one haunting incident in 1991, a 14-year-old boy named Konarak Sinthasamphone managed to escape Dahmer's apartment. Neighbors called 911 after finding him disoriented and injured in the street. But when police arrived, Dahmer convinced them it was a domestic dispute between lovers. The officers actually escorted the boy back into Dahmer's apartment. Hours later, Konarak was dead. This failure would later be seen as one of the most tragic missed opportunities to stop Dahmer before more lives were lost. By July of 1991, Dahmer's spree had reached its horrifying peak. That summer, he invited Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man, back to his apartment. But Edwards sensed something was wrong. He noticed the foul odor, the strange blue barrel in the corner. When Dahmer tried to handcuff him, Edwards managed to fight back, escape, and flag down 2 police officers. When the officers entered Dahmer's apartment, they expected a routine check. What they found instead was a nightmare. Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies, skulls in the refrigerator, and human remains scattered throughout. One officer later said it was like walking into a horror movie. But this was all too real. Dahmer was immediately arrested. The trial of Jeffrey Dahmer in 1992 captivated the world. Courtrooms were packed, families of victims gave heartbreaking testimonies, and Dahmer himself sat quietly, often expressionless. When asked why he killed, his answers were chilling. He wanted control, he wanted companionship, he didn't want his victims to leave. Psychologists debated whether he was insane. The defense argued his urges were uncontrollable. The prosecution countered that Dahmer knew exactly what he was doing. In the end, the jury agreed. He was sane and fully responsible. Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, totaling 957 years. But even prison couldn't contain the dark fascination surrounding him. Some saw Dahmer as a monster. Others saw him as a tragic figure, a man destroyed by loneliness and obsession. In interviews, he expressed remorse, even becoming a born-again Christian. Yet for the families of his victims, no apology could ever undo the loss. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was killed in prison by a fellow inmate. His death closed the final chapter of his story, but it didn't end the questions. Today, Dahmer's case continues to haunt us, not just because of the horror of his crimes, but because of what it reveals about society, about the warning signs we ignore, about the failures of law enforcement, and about how easily evil can hide in plain sight. But above all, this story is not Jeffrey Dahmer's alone. It belongs to the 17 men whose lives he stole. Men like Stephen Hicks, the first. Like Tony Hughes, a deaf man who wanted to be a model. Like Konarak Sinthasamphone, just 14 years old. Each of them had dreams, families, and futures that mattered. And those are the names we should never forget. Jeffrey Dahmer is gone, but his story endures as a chilling reminder of what can happen when loneliness, obsession, and neglect combine in the darkest of ways. It is a story of horror, but also of remembrance. Because in the end, the most important thing we can do is not glorify the killer, but honor the lives of his victims. That is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Monster. If you found this look into the past insightful, subscribe for more stories that explore not just the crimes, but the lives impacted by them. And remember, behind every headline, there are human beings who deserve to be remembered.